Hi, this is Dr. Ned Hallowell for Distraction. Today, I'm once again joined by the wonderful Jessica McCabe of How to ADHD. I love how she uses it as a verb, How to ADHD, for a special episode sponsored by Landmark College in Putney, Vermont, the world's leader. The college of choice for students who learn differently. Thank you so much for joining me again, Jessica.
Thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, so let's get to it. What do you have for us today?
So today I want to talk about something that is an ongoing issue for me and for most people with ADHD, and I think it's particularly an issue for college students, which is dealing with overwhelm. We get so overwhelmed sometimes that we end up, there's so much we have to do, so much on our plate that we end up procrastinating. We shut down, like our brains literally get paralyzed and we don't know what to do next. And so that's how we end up, binging on Netflix instead of working on the paper that we're that's super important to our grade. It also sometimes leads to meltdowns. I have had full on meltdowns as a YouTuber just because there's so much on my plate. I'm so overwhelmed. So it's something that I've had to learn how to deal with, and I wanted to share some tips with your listeners.
Just say a little bit more about that overwhelm. What happens when you feel that way?
Yeah, so when we get overwhelmed, we end up procrastinating, our brains shut down, we don't know what to do next, we feel really paralyzed. Sometimes we have full-on meltdowns. I've had full-on crying fits in the middle of my YouTube studio just because there's so much on my plate, I don't know how to handle it. And it really keeps us from being effective. And there's a couple of reasons why we get so overwhelmed, right? One is that we are asking a lot more of our brain, right? Being a college student is a lot like being a YouTuber. You kind of know what you signed up for, but you really end up getting in over your head really quickly. Stuff keeps getting thrown at you last minute. There's a lot of deadlines. There's just a lot of pressure. So it's really easy to get overwhelmed. Plus, you're asking a lot more of your brain. When you go to college, you're in a new place, you've got new routines, you're responsible for getting yourself to class on time if you weren't already, and the stakes are really high, right? You're probably paying a lot to be there, your future depends on it, all these things, people keep putting pressure on you, so it's super easy to get overwhelmed, and for ADHD brains, it's really easy to get overwhelmed as well because we have trouble processing information as it comes in. Everything just feels equally important, so it's just super easy to get stuck and not know what to focus on.
So what are your tips for how to handle that?
So I kind of broke down 6 ways that we tend to get overwhelmed and what we can do about it. So
look at you, you're so organized. Six ways. All right, let's start with the first one. Yeah.
So the first way is that you're trying to hold everything in your head. And most of the time, this is why I'm overwhelmed. Usually I'm overwhelmed because my brain is thinking about everything I have to do, and it just feels like a lot. So the solution to that is just to get it out of your head. And Landmark College suggests this tip as well. It's what I use. The first thing when I'm overwhelmed that I do is a brain dump. Just whatever's in my head, whatever I feel like I have to do, I just get it down on paper because I can't organize that information in my brain, but once it's on paper, I can. Once it's on paper, your brain is less likely to keep reminding you about it, which is part of what gets overwhelming, right? I have to do this, and I have to do this, and oh my gosh, this, and I have to do this. When everything you have to do is bouncing around in your brain like that, it, again, feels all equally important and more importantly, it all needs to get done right now. So, of course, you're overwhelmed. Once it's on paper, you can start to prioritize it and figure out where it fits into your schedule.
So tip number 1 is a brain dump. Get it on paper or on your laptop or wherever you put things down so you can hold on to it outside of your brain.
Exactly. And then you can start to work with the information. It's really hard to, especially with limited working memory, which we, struggle with as people with ADHD. It's really hard to work with the information while you're trying to hold it in your head. So once it's on paper, then you can start to figure out what your priorities are.
This is a tip they actually recommend at Landmark College, right?
Yeah. Do a brain dump and then prioritize. And another thing you can do to get stuff out of your head, by the way, is to make it routine. So you don't even have to think about it. So I don't even have to remember to meditate anymore. My brain just knows that when I wake up, it's time to meditate. That's something that's off my, mental plate now.
That's the beauty of having a pattern and a routine and a habit.
Yeah. And routines can be really hard for people with ADHD to build, and we tend to resist them. But I think having one and just having it be kind of flexible is really important. it's worth taking the time to build those routines.
It's tremendously, tremendously helpful.
And then the second way we tend to get overwhelmed is that stuff keeps piling up on you because you're not dealing with it until it's urgent. We talked a little bit about this in the study tips episode we did last time, but ADHDers have a different time horizon. Stuff doesn't really alert us that it's time to work on it until it's almost due. So if we don't consciously manually program our schedules to start working on stuff well before it's due, it's really easy for it to sneak up on us. So I've absolutely been guilty of this. Like one day I'll spend 5 hours on social media and the next day I'll be super overwhelmed with everything I have to get done the next day. And it's because I didn't realize it was coming. My brain didn't go, hey, by the way, you should probably work on this. So that's one of the reasons it's important to keep a schedule and a to-do list is you need to be able to anticipate what's coming so that you can make sure that any one day doesn't get incredibly overloaded. So that's something I've definitely learned the hard way, to try to make time for things that are important well before they're due so that you don't end up in everything's on fire mode on a regular basis.
Like everything's on fire mode. That's something you want to avoid.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
so,
what's your third tip?
The third way that you end up getting overwhelmed is you've legitimately got too much on your plate, right? Like that does happen. We can be enthusiastic about new stuff, and we also don't have the best sense of how long things take, so it's really easy for us to take on too much, especially because we tend to be people pleasers as well. So the solution to that is to see where you can cut back, which, if you're a college student and you're listening to this right now, you're probably laughing at me like, yes, I wish. But it is possible for most colleges, most programs to take on a lighter course load. It's possible to cut back a little bit at work. It's possible to only have 2 social commitments that week rather than 3. Just little ways that you can cut back, I think, is really important. And before you say yes to something new, do a reality check, which it took me until my 30s to realize that this is a thing you should do. But just ask yourself 2 questions. Like, what am I actually agreeing to? Like, what is involved? Because if somebody invites you to a party, it's not just going to the party that you have to do. You also have to figure out what to wear and get ready and go to the party and, maybe follow up with new friends after the party. It's more than just the event. It's all the preparation and the cleanup for the event as well. And 2, where in my schedule will I put it? If you are already maxed out, even if something sounds new and exciting, you kind of have to make sure that you'll have somewhere to put that. And if you do add it to your schedule, figure out what you're going to be willing to bump or reschedule to make that happen. I have this problem with my closet where I'm just like, every time I buy something new, I just expect that I'll find a place for it, and I never take anything out. So eventually my closet is really stuffed full of clothes, right? It's like that with your life, too. If you're going to add more stuff, you have to figure out what you can get rid of.
Right. Or you end up living in like a hoarder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. ADHDers are time hoarders. We're like, we'll just fit everything in here. And then, of course we don't want to open up our schedule because that's like opening up the closets and everything just comes spilling out at you. But there's another reason, too, why we might end up with too much on our plate. And this is kind of getting serious for a second, which is we're trying to make up for lost time or past mistakes, right? I didn't do well on the last test, so now I have to do really well on this one. Or I bailed on my friend's party last time, so this time I have to be there and bring snacks because I promised. For that, I think you kind of have to accept your limits, right? Accept that certain things are a struggle for you, and don't expect your future self to be magically more together than your current self. Right. If you take away anything from this episode, I hope it's this. It's okay to apologize to someone without promising to make it up to them.
So you mean to say, I'm sorry I didn't get it done in time, or I'm sorry I'm late, or I'm sorry I forgot your birthday, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, any of those things without, next time I'll throw your birthday party for you, right? That's like a really good way to end up with too much on your plate.
Right.
It's okay to do nice things for people, absolutely, but don't do it out of a sense of guilt or trying to make up for not being as good and not being good enough in the past. And it's a really easy trap, I think, to fall into when you have ADHD is to go, I'll do better next time. Well, I get that sentiment, and I've been there. I do it all the time, and I have to catch myself personally to not overpromise. the best advice I think I ever got was underpromise and overdeliver.
Yes,
right?
that's very good. Before we go on to the next tip, I want to just mention our wonderful sponsor, Landmark College, where you can learn tips like these and many, many, many more. They're really masterful. Okay, Jessica, take us on to the next one.
Okay, so the next way we get overwhelmed is like forget the rest of your life. Sometimes just one project is overwhelming. If you're working on a project like, let's say, writing a paper, don't try to write a great paper. That's really intimidating. You have to break it down into steps. A good way to do that is to start with something easy. Just open your word processor, type 3 random letters, right? Do a brain dump. The next step might be write a terrible first draft, like just awful. Like the next time, like rewrite it so it's slightly less terrible, right? These are all doable steps. You know that you've broken down a project enough when every step seems doable. Yes. And you don't have to break down all of the steps at once if that's daunting to you. Just if you're thinking about a project as it comes to you throughout the day, be like, and then I'll have to do this and I'll have to do this. Like just start, putting in your notepad or your phone or whatever, what you're going to have to do to get that project done. And then just make sure that you break down every step until it's doable. Otherwise it can just get really daunting. And that's, again, how we end up procrastinating, right? We don't know where to start because for our brains, the starting point is not obvious.
So where do you start?
I think you start as small as possible, right? Whatever it is. Sometimes it's looking at the project. Sometimes we just want to completely avoid it entirely. And sometimes just opening up the assignment and going, okay, what do I actually have to do is enough to get your brain to start thinking about how to get it done. But again, like if it's a paper, just open your word processor. You can even just format the paper to how the teacher wants it. Like what point font do you need? Like what kind of spacing? Just format the paper to the right margins or whatever. And then that's done. You've already started that paper. And it sounds so silly and small, but yeah. No,
but just starting it really sort of ignites your unconscious. I just finished writing my 20th book. It's a memoir. And when I started it, all I had was the first sentence. I knew the first sentence, and that was it. I had no plan. I had no outline. I had nothing. And I had that first sentence. But when I wrote that first sentence, my unconscious just came alive. And then, like you said, you write the first draft, which is, nothing, not nearly as good as you want it to be, but then you go back and edit it and shape it. So, I think that's a good tip for, just start somewhere and just get it going. Okay, do you have another tip for us?
Yeah, so the next thing is you're trying to do everything at the same time. ADHD brains tend to do this a lot, and it shows up in different but equally ineffective ways. We are trying to text while we study, while we eat, while we sleep, or we're trying to change all of our habits the same week, usually in the form of New Year's resolutions, or you do badly on a test and suddenly you're like, now I'm going to be the perfect, student and study all the time or whatever. It's just like, okay,
right.
let's take that down a little bit. We are very ambitious people and we think big, and that's great for some things, but when you're trying to get things accomplished, you want to try and get a little smaller with that. Monotasking is the latest thing. It's a thing because we thought for a while, like, hey, multitasking, right? Like that'll get more done in our lives, because if you can do 2 things at the same time, clearly that's more productive than just one. But we're starting to realize that's not the case, because your brain does not actually multitask. It switches between tasks really quickly, but every time it switches, you lose a little time. So if you focus on one task at a time, you can actually get that task done a lot more effectively and a lot more quickly than if you're trying to do 2 at the same time. That's kind of the thought behind the Pomodoro technique, where you just commit to one task that you need to work on for however long. I think the traditional Pomodoro technique is like 25 minutes. I think you recommend 10 minutes on and then a 3-minute break. But for whatever amount of time you feel comfortable working, set a timer and don't do anything else for that limited amount of time, and then you give yourself a break. The one exception to monotasking is if you're doing 2 simple tasks. So you can totally listen to a podcast while you clean your room. Just, don't try to cook dinner while you make flashcards. That's not very effective.
As long as the 2 tasks are not terribly challenging. These are so helpful, Jessica, and you've really generated these from your own personal experience, haven't you?
Yeah, so I do a lot of research for my channel in general, so a lot of this is stuff that I've come across, but this one in particular is definitely based on my personal experience because I do get overwhelmed so easily and so quickly. I have a very ambitious brain. I want to do all the things, and I want to take on everything. And sometimes you just have to, go, okay, that's how my brain likes to work. And that's great in some ways. I've accomplished a lot because of it. But the flip side of that is having to figure out how to manage the overwhelm that comes with it.
You can become a victim of your own enthusiasms.
For sure. I did a tweet the other day where I had a conversation with my brain, and I'm like, okay, brain, email this person back and let them know that we will think about this project and get back to them. And my brain's like, okay, cool. Done. I did it. I told them that you would do it, and I made 17 different promises that you now have to fulfill. And I'm like, okay, great, brain, just don't hit. And my brain's like, send. So yeah, I absolutely am guilty of overcommitting myself quite a bit. So that's something I have to keep an eye on too.
And we've also learned that you have an ongoing dialogue with your brain.
I for sure do. Yeah, I have a great relationship with my brain. I think of it sometimes as a separate entity, and it's like my brain helps me accomplish amazing things, and it also gets me into trouble. And there are a lot of things that I have to do to take care of it because.
But I love the way you describe your relationship with your brain. So you like your brain, and it helps you, and it also can get you into trouble. But that's nice.
Yeah. I have to do what I can to support my brain. I don't like to limit it. I don't like to be like, brain, be more realistic, because I love my ADHD brain. I love that it bounces all over the place and wants to do all the things, and I just have to go, okay, every once in a while, it's going to need some extra support from me, and that's okay. That's something I'm willing to give it.
That's a great way of putting it, Jessica. I love that. That's really wonderful.
Thanks.
Well, this has been terrific. Do you have any last tips, or did we go through your list pretty well?
That's most of the list. I have one more, which is the last reason we might get overwhelmed is we need help. Sometimes you just need help. You need medication to help you focus, or a friend to help you study, or accommodations like the ones at Landmark to make school more doable. I don't think anybody accomplishes awesome things in life by themselves, so it's important to ask for help when you need it.
Absolutely. It's my mantra, never worry alone.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And don't feel bad if you need it, right? Just because you or somebody else thinks you should be able to do it without help doesn't mean that you can or have to, right? Every brain is different. You have to respect what yours needs and do what works for your brain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. None of this should be able to kind of stuff. Well, Jessica, listen, this has been absolutely great. And you're a regular now. You'll be back next month for another special episode. Is that right?
Yeah. I'll be back talking about self-care.
We want to have you on as often as possible. Thank you so much. At Landmark College, if I can close by mentioning them, in Putney, Vermont, targeted strategies and individualized personal development models help students become their own advocates. And that's the truth. Learn more at lcdistraction.org. Landmark College, learn your way, succeed uniquely. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. Great tips from Jessica. Go to her website, howtoadhd.com. She's a gem. She's a jewel. She's just an incredible force of nature. Thanks for joining us, all of you listeners. Please send us your questions and comments. And Jessica, until next time, goodbye.
Bye, Dr. Hallowell. Thank you.